Within a bleak and dismal swamp, hidden beneath its murky waters, lies the headquarters of the most sinister villains of all time.
The Chase Shep Show with Shep and Chase.
Now let's do this. Just went to adjust my glasses and I don't have them on. What's going on, everybody? It's Chase with the Chase and Shep Show, and I am flying solo dolo today because it's Chase Scene Sunday, the very first Chase Scene Sunday of many to come, I'm sure. Today I'm gracing you with my my beautiful blues and the tired dark circles under them that have been bringing you this show for the past month. So I'm flying solo on Sundays because I watch a lot of movies. A lot of movies. As I've said before in past episodes, far more than Aaron does, far more than the average person does, I'm sure. But I'm a huge lover of film. I'm a huge lover of entertainment. I always have been since I was a little kid. There's video footage of me as a child reenacting scenes from my favorite movies, whether it be Space Jam or Nightmare Before Christmas or whatever. At the time, I have been like this since birth when it comes to movies. My love of movies is ingrained in me. It is a deep thing. I pursue film as a career. I've been a student of film my entire life. So needless to say, I'm kind of a movie geek. This is weird. This is weird to do by myself. This is going to suck every Sunday, having to do this by myself with nobody to bounce off of. So anyways, 2020 is behind us. And, usually around this time of year, most movie folks on the internet are going to be talking about their top movies of the year. But 2020 was kind of a different year as far as film goes. It was a year that completely upended the Hollywood system, changed everything as we know it. And so there wasn't a whole lot that was released in the traditional sense. So today I'm going to be talking about my personal 2020 in movies. At the beginning of the year, I decided to do something a little different, something I'd been meaning to do for a little while, but I started logging all of the movies I watched, keeping an ongoing list all year long of everything I watched. It was a lot. By 2020's end, I had watched cumulatively 270 movies. 133 of those movies were brand new to me. I'd never seen them before. I saw them for the first time last year in 2020, and 137 of those movies I rewatched because I'm such a nerd and I love my statistics. I was trying to keep a running list of like the most watched performer and just all sorts of just bullshit statistics for my movie watching, just for my own nerdy pleasure. I realized that was going to be fucking very difficult to do, so I settled for just a handful of things. So my most watched month for movies was December. As one could imagine, with the 25 Slays of Christmas going on, watched a lot of shit. I watched 55 movies in December, with my lowest month being May, where I only watched 11 movies. And it makes sense, with even being locked down in May, it's warmer out, it's nicer, and typically if I haven't watched a lot of movies in a month, it's because I got hooked on a TV show, which is exactly what happened back in May. I said this on yesterday's episode. I said it on Super Saturday, and I'm sorry to tell you that I lied. Birds of Prey was my most watched movie of 2020. That was not the lie. I did not watch it 4 times. I watched it 3 times. I thought I'd watched a few other movies 3 times this year, and I guess I didn't. Anything else hit 2 times and capped off. Birds of Prey, I watched 3 with the intention of watching a 4th time. But I stand by what I said yesterday, and I would have watched it 5 times. I would have watched it fucking 10 times in 2020. I know it wasn't everybody's favorite, but that was one of the few things I did get to see in a movie theater last year. If not the last thing I saw in a movie theater last year, I'm not entirely sure. I'd have to consult the list. Let's check out the list. No, I guess before everything shut down, the last movie I saw in the theater was The Lodge, which was also one of my favorite movies of 2020. It was really hard to I didn't see a whole lot of new releases, like 2020 releases this past year, because again, like I said, it was a weird year for that. So I can't really give you my top 10. I can definitely tell you what 2 of my least favorite were. I started out my 2020 movie year, my very first movie I watched in 2020, and 269 films after that still managed to be one of the worst films I saw, The Grudge, that came out last year at the beginning in January of 2020. Just awful. Was not good whatsoever. That and Scoob were my two biggest disappointments of 2020. Today, what I'm going to do, rather than get into my favorite 2020 films, what I did as I kept my movie log all year is at the end of each month, I went back over my list and I looked at everything I watched and I chose a favorite movie that I watched that month that stood out above them all. So today we're going to talk about those movies. We're going to talk about my 12 movies, my 12 favorite movies of 2020 from month to month. There were a few months where it was like super obvious what my favorite movie was. There were other months where it was a close call. Like at the very last second, my favorite movie pulled out ahead to be chosen as my favorite movie of the month when I had one in mind prior. So with time, I will probably mention some runners up. So January 2020, I watched 21 movies in January, and my number one movie of January to start off the list, The Beach Bum, starring Matthew McConaughey. It had a huge cast. Everybody's in this fucking movie. Isla Fisher, Snoop Dogg, Jonah Hill, Zac Efron. So many people were in this movie. It was directed by Harmony Korine, who directed Spring Breakers and Kids. Maybe he didn't direct Kids. That was probably a lie. He directed some fucking piece of shit. I know that. I'm not a fan. I am not a fan of Harmony Korine. I find his movies very hard to watch. So imagine my surprise when I sat down to watch The Beach Bum and it was my favorite movie of the month. And it's still, I mean, that's why it's making my top 12 of the year. It was such a pleasant surprise. It was really funny, surprisingly emotional. As far as Harmony Korine's films go, this is by far the most accessible for anybody to watch. Everything else really borders into that just being artful to be artful, I guess, is a nice way to put it. But The Beach Bum, I really loved the performances. I loved the ensemble. I loved the ending. There's a lot that I was surprised by with this movie. And that was a month that nothing came close. I mean, that was my favorite movie through and through for January. Going into February, movie number 2, we saw a lot of cool stuff because we were catching up for the Oscars and there were still movies in theaters at the time. So we watched a lot of good stuff in February. However, one movie stood out above all the rest. And mind you, this is the month where I watched Birds of Prey for the very first time. Movie number 2 for February, Waves. Waves is beautiful. I wish there were movie theaters open to go see this in, even though it came out in 2019. Such a deeply emotional story, and the way it was done. It was directed. His name's escaping me right now, but it was directed by the same guy that did It Comes at Night. And I remember watching It Comes at Night and thinking to myself, this is one of the best directed movies of the year. I loved the direction. I loved everything about the presentation of It Comes at Night. And so to see this director take on a different sort of genre, to go from seeing his directing style in a horror film to a drama, Waves was directed, the director's name was Trey Edward Schultz. And Waves follows a black suburban family through, we'll just say, really hard times. Some shit goes down in this movie, and the movie's kind of two halves, with the first half being about the son, played by Kelvin Harrison Jr., and the second half being about the daughter. Sterling K. Brown is magnificent in this movie. I mean, he's always great in everything I've seen him in, but he is just magnificent in this movie as the hard ass dad that maybe pushes a little too hard. Man, it'll rip your heart out and take shit on it. There's no doubt about that. Very emotional movie, but by far the most beautiful movie you're going to watch. I was attracted to this movie because I heard it was a musical. Having seen the movie now, I understand where that came from. It is not a musical in the sense that people break out into song and dance, but the whole thing is told through music. And I mean, even the opening scene where Kelvin Harrison Jr.'s character is in a car with Alexa Demi's character. Alexa Demi Amy from Euphoria. They're in the car together, and the camera keeps kind of going in circles in the cab of the car, and it's set to, I don't know. I know one of the greatest soundtracks. I will tell you that. Like, especially if you like modern day music. I mean, it's got all sorts of shit in it. But the only person coming to mind right now is Frank Ocean. Just go watch the trailer for Waves, and you'll completely understand why this is such a beautiful movie just from the trailer alone. But I could not recommend that one more. Movie number 3, going into March. In March, we were still doing PCP, the Phil and Chase podcast, sort of like we were trying to figure out what to do next. We were rolling with our themed months. And so we had decided that it was going to be March and Scorsese. So we watched a ton of Scorsese films. And again, this was a month where nothing came close to touching this movie. And I didn't finish it, and that's why I didn't make the list again. But I almost watched it twice back to back. Like, it ended, and I literally the next day, my friend came home to find me watching it again. I was about halfway through it. I went out, I bought the book. It's over here. Silence. Martin Scorsese is one of the greatest film directors there is. I mean, hands down. There's no argument about that. And he's got so many classics under his belt. And prior to seeing Silence, and this was my first time seeing it, I would have to say, probably The Departed or Wolf of Wall Street is probably my pick for favorite Scorsese movie. But now Silence came along and completely just made me question everything. It is such a deeply personal movie for Scorsese, and that really shows. It's a very religious story, but I don't think that takes away from it. I think even if you're not a religious person, you will find enjoyment in this film. It stars Andrew Garfield, Adam Driver, as a couple of Jesuit priests who go to Japan to save Liam Neeson, who's another priest, set in the 17th century, I believe. It just really analyzes religion and faith, especially with Andrew Garfield's character. You want to talk about two powerhouse performances. Andrew Garfield and Adam Driver in this film. Again, this movie is just, it is epic. It is epic in every sense of the phrase. And I haven't watched them yet, but I'm very interested to go watch Martin Scorsese's other two films about religion. One of them being Kundun, I believe is how that's pronounced. And then the other one is The Last Temptation of Christ, starring Willem Dafoe, neither of which I have seen yet. But Silence, it's a thinker, not in the sense, not a thinker in the way that like Inception is a thinker, but it's one that it's going to stick with you. You're going to be thinking about a lot of stuff. But it's hands down, in my opinion, Martin Scorsese's best movie. And I'm a big Scorsese fan. I live and die on The Departed and Wolf of Wall Street being a couple of the greatest films of all time. But Silence is just, it's something else entirely. It's beautiful. So in April, again, a month with no contest, I suppose. I guess the other movie that was in contention in April for being my favorite was a 2020 release. It was Extraction with Chris Hemsworth, which was just a fun action movie that came out last year. But my favorite movie of April of last year was actually a documentary that was on Netflix called Circus of Books. This was so interesting to me. The Circus of Books is about an elderly Jewish couple who, to make ends meet, back in the 70s, opened up basically a hardcore porn store, specifically leaning towards the gay demographic and stuff like that. And what really makes this movie interesting, the director of the film is the daughter of said couple. These are her parents that the film is about. And these kids knew nothing about it growing up. It was one of those things that they heard about it from their friends later in life. They're just like, oh, mom and dad run a bookstore, and then lo and behold, they run this hardcore gay porn store, and it really throws them for a loop. Later in life, I think at least two of the three kids, I mean, this was April when I watched it, at least two of the three kids ended up coming out to their parents and stuff. And the reaction of the mother in particular, when their kid came out to her. I mean, here's this person who runs a hardcore gay porn store and is appalled at the idea that their child has come out as gay. She feels like it's their fault for the running the store. They're being punished because they're deeply religious people. And so it's a very interesting story, seeing it from such a personal point of view, and to see the transformation that this family went through. And I mean all of them, the parents and the kids. It was a very interesting story. And if you support the gay community and everything like that, it's a very interesting story. And I highly recommend this one. It's on Netflix. And a little side note, I spent most of April with again, I think this was the last of our themed months. It was Resident April, and I watched all the Resident Evil movies, and I regret nothing. So May, the shortest month of them all. I watched Birds of Prey again, quite a few rewatches, but the one that was the victor of May, movie number 5, The Invisible Man, another 2020 release. We didn't get to catch this one in theaters, but as soon as it came out, I went out and got a copy and did not regret that purchase whatsoever. It was great. It lived up to the hype that I'd been hearing around it. I'm a Blumhouse fan. And I'll also be the first person to admit that Blumhouse has two different types of movies, the ones that they give a shit about and the ones that they are just trying to make money with. And this is definitely one that they gave a shit about. The Invisible Man was directed by frequent collaborator of James Wan, horror extraordinaire James Wan, who made The Conjuring and the original Saw. Lee Wanell. Lee Wanell was the director of The Invisible Man, who is also a co-creator of the original Saw, as well as Insidious and a lot of these like horror, modern day horror classics. As far as horror in 2020 goes, this was definitely one of the better picks for sure, because the tension in it was so well executed. And prior to the movie coming out, I read the original H.G. Wells novel, and even though they are vastly different, the spirit is very much there. I liked the way they framed it in modern day with the abuse storyline that was going on, because I think that's a very, very, not just a real problem today, but a very real fear for people. I have personally known people who, have been in abusive relationships, maybe not quite to this degree, but pretty close sometimes. I have personally, been in abusive relationships. So I too, like, it was a personal fear that it was playing on. I was like, I recognize that fear that, why can't I remember anybody's names on Sunday? I mean, I personally identified with that fear that Elizabeth Moss was, her character was feeling in this film. And Elizabeth Moss, let's give it up. Let's give it up for her. It's almost a damn shame that she's not going to be thrown in the mix for the acting at the Oscars this year, because it was an earlier movie and it was a horror movie, and those usually get looked over. But one of these days, the day is coming, Elizabeth Moss is going to get her Oscar, because that fear lives in those facial expressions, in those eyes. She's such an expressive actress. I think her, combined with Wanell's directing, made this one of the best movies of 2020. So my 6th movie, coming into June, I went on 2 kicks in the same month. Went on an extended cut kick. I also went on a Spike Lee kick. Watched a lot of Spike Lee, and it was very, very hard to choose, because those were all the top contenders for June, which one was going to be my favorite. His newest one, Da 5 Bloods, that came out last year, is definitely one of my favorite movies of 2020. But I watched that, Malcolm X, the next day, and then I watched his documentary When the Levees Broke, parts 1 and 2, the next couple of days after that. And of all of these movies, my favorite of June is When the Levees Broke, parts 1 and 2. This was a documentary that originally aired on HBO. There's a sequel series, or sequel documentary, I suppose, called If the Lord's Willing and the Creek Don't Rise, I think is what it's called. And I still need to watch that, because that picks up later down the line. When the Levees Broke is about Hurricane Katrina and its aftermath. And this thing is epic. It's like 4 hours long. I mean, it's split into the 2 parts, Acts 1 and 2 and Acts 3 and 4. And I'm old enough to remember Hurricane Katrina happening, but I was young enough then to not completely understand it in the way that Spike Lee laid it out for me in this documentary. Definitely, I cried watching this movie, and I had such a deeper understanding for this thing that I thought I knew about. And I felt the same way a day or two before that when I watched Malcolm X. Here's this person who I've always heard about, and I know certain things about, but I don't know anything about him. And, as I'm watching this movie, granted, you shouldn't take your facts from films and stuff like that necessarily. You should do your fact check and later on read a book and all that good shit. But I did. I learned so much that, they're not teaching us these things in school. They're not talking about these things. And so I'm glad that Spike Lee is out there teaching us. When I heard he recommended kids skip school to go see Malcolm X. I couldn't agree more. If that was the case today, he would have my full support. But I feel the same way about When the Levees Broke. If you are at all interested in the story of Hurricane Katrina, he interviews a lot of people from the New Orleans area, and the whole documentary really puts it into perspective. A couple things: one, the way the government handled this shit. Two, really got me thinking about some of the conspiracies that surround this, with it being possibly intentional and all this shit, with the dam breaking, not the hurricane, but the dam breaking after the fact. And finally, I mean, I don't think, unless you were there in Hurricane Katrina, or you have ever been in a situation like that, as far as a natural disaster goes, the footage of this and the footage of the people in the wreckage and the ruins of it all, standing on the roofs of their houses, abandoned on the freeway, the people who were all at the football stadium or basketball arena or whatever the fuck it was that they were all holed up in. I mean, these conditions are just fucking awful. But to see the sheer power of Mother Nature and what it can do, I mean, it is made quite clear in this documentary. And that's something like I said, if you've lived it, you don't need to watch this documentary to know. But I think it's something a lot of us take for granted. Mother Nature, if she wanted to, she could Thanos snap our asses right off the face of the planet, So July, movie number 7. There was one that was my favorite that got bumped by my favorite. My runner-up for July was The Guest, directed by Adam Wingard and starring Dan Stevens. You got to go watch that one. Go check it out. But my favorite of July was also a 2020 movie, The Hunt. Originally supposed to be released, multiple times and continue to get pushed back. This movie had a hell of a time. It delayed its release because of all the mass shootings that were going on. And then it just started getting all this horrible word of mouth from politicians and stuff. And they used it. They totally used it. When they did finally come to theaters at the beginning of the year, all the trailers were, it's the movie that nobody can stop talking about, but nobody's seen, everybody has all this bullshit to say about a movie that they haven't even seen. The political satire in this movie, incredibly heavy-handed, but if this is not one of the most shocking movies of 2020 I've seen, or surprising, I should say, in the sense that as a filmmaker, as a film lover, especially, 25 Slaves of Christmas is a great example of, when you sit there and you watch movies for so long, you see everything coming. The camera angles, the plot points, the certain devices and where things are going. And The Hunt knows that. And I think The Hunt ultimately should be a film shown in film classes. I mean, it should be shown to aspiring filmmakers as a lesson in how to subvert expectations. You expect one thing to happen as a film goer because you've seen so many movies and you expect certain things to happen. It takes all of those expectations and says, fuck you. I mean, it completely just does whatever the good goddamn it wants. I mean, it'll set up a certain camera angle because the filmmakers know that camera angle means something is going to happen. And then it just does something entirely fucking different. This movie was insane on so many different levels. It was hilarious. And the people that get mad about it are the exact people this movie is making fun of. So it took a while and it finally got out to theaters, and then COVID hit and all the theaters shut down, and it was one of the first movies to go to streaming after that. Now, August was a hard one. Watched a lot of good ones in August. It was also the 10th anniversary of my one of my favorite films of all time, Scott Pilgrim versus the World. So I watched that on its 10th birthday. My pick for August originally was Blind Spotting, which is a movie that I think is incredibly underrated and deserves more attention, especially in today's climate. I mean, it's got a lot to say. I highly recommend it to everybody. But the movie that won me over in August, movie number 8 for 2020, The King of Staten Island, which I turned around and watched again 2 days after I watched it the first time. I love Judd Apatow. Judd Apatow is one of the filmmakers who started me down my path of wanting to be a filmmaker. Or I guess I already wanted to be a filmmaker when Judd Apatow came along, but he was that second wave that started molding me as a filmmaker. And this just feels like his best work. The man's done a lot of stuff, and this feels like his best work for sure. Pete Davidson, I called it. I called it. I called it fucking 5 years ago that Pete Davidson was going to be a star. He was hardly on SNL there at first, but I loved him, and I was just like, I see this guy going places. I'm so happy he got his chance, and I'm so glad that he got to tell this story, this story that was so personal to him. All of the performances are great. Not only does it prove that Pete Davidson is a star to look out for, because now he's going to be in all sorts of shit. He's going to be in the Suicide Squad later this year, so that's exciting. But it also, Marissa Tomei, she's always great. But Bill Burr, please, Hollywood, keep putting Bill Burr in things. Bill Burr is such an incredible actor. Not only is he just a hilarious, tell it how it is kind of guy, but I mean, he is an incredible actor. And if King of Staten Island doesn't convince you that he's an incredible actor, go watch The Mandalorian, especially his season 2 episode, because he knocked it out of the park in that too. September, movie number 9. My favorite movie of September was The Social Dilemma, the documentary on Netflix regarding social media and its effect on our life, and the way it all works and the worries about it. And it's a cautionary tale for sure. I got off Facebook like 2 years ago, probably almost. No, yeah, 2 years ago, maybe almost 3 at this point. I don't know. But the last line, some may say YouTube is social media, I guess. My last line of social media was Snapchat, and I deleted that September 1st. And it's been a quiet world. It's been a very quiet world since then. And I'm definitely an advocate for unplugging and shit like that. But this movie really just like all the fears and shit that I already like had about things. This movie basically was made just so that all the people involved in the creation of social media could go, yeah, no, you're right. You should be scared. And nobody in this movie was saying that like we're just fucked entirely. They're saying we could be fucked entirely, but we need to do something about it now, while we still have the chance, before this social media thing gets any bigger or any more out of hand. But I definitely think it was one of the more important movies of 2020. Great conversation starter, if anything else. You can do a little double feature, Social Dilemma and Circus of Books. There you go, a little Netflix documentary double feature. October. Movie number 10. So this October, little side note, for fucking too long now, for several years, I have tried and failed to do 31 days of Halloween, essentially. My goal was to watch 31 horror movies in the month of October. This was the first month that not only did I succeed, but I exceeded the 31 movies, and I was very excited about that. So needless to say, October was my second highest movie watching month because of the 31 days of horror. But I only watched 36 movies, only, as opposed to the 55 for December. But out of all of those movies, and a lot of them were new to me, I watched a lot of new ones this October, but the one that I watched that I was like, I'd never heard of it before. And I threw it on thinking, oh, this will just be like good, cheesy, fun. Phase 4 came out in 1974. Here's the plot description. Desert ants suddenly form a collective intelligence and begin to wage war on the inhabitants. Yeah. So I'm thinking, okay, cool. I'm getting myself into like a giant like ants attack type movie. Fuck no. This is one of the most like cerebral, like, it's outdated a little bit, it's 1974, but like this is one of those movies that I don't want to massacre his name, but if the director of Arrival and Dune, the upcoming Dune and all those movies, if he did a remake of this, it would be incredible. And it was one of my favorite movies this year of all the things that I didn't know existed. I'm glad this little gem popped up. It's I think I watched it on Amazon Prime or Hulu, but it is streaming. You should definitely check it out if you like horror movies. If you like more so like cerebral sci-fi movies, it's just like their usage of like there's a blend of like stop motion and real footage of ants and stuff like that just really makes this an interesting time. Like it is truly a battle of the wits between these like intelligent ants and these scientists out in the desert with these intelligent ants. It's not going to be for everybody, I'll tell you that right now, but it was definitely for this guy. I enjoyed it quite a bit. November was the only month that I struggled to pick a favorite movie because I mostly just rewatched a bunch of Marvel movies and then watched some mediocre 2020 movies. But out of all of that, my favorite, Night of the Living Dead, the original, the OG 1968 Night of the Living Dead. And it ended up becoming my favorite movie of the month. That was my pick, only because of what stemmed from that. Can't really get into it too much right now, but hopefully this time next year, you'll find out why it became my favorite movie of November. So we'll move on. December. So if you're joining us, if you joined us for the 25 Slays of Christmas, there were a lot. I watched those 25 Slays of Christmas and then watched 30 other movies. And I watched a lot of really good stuff this month. I definitely thought Fat Man was going to be my pick for December. I all but had it locked in, and I'm like, well, something will have to come along here at the tail end of December to take its spot, and I'll be damned if one didn't come along. And it was a movie I'd seen before. If I'm thinking about it, I think my November and December picks are my only two rewatches that made my favorite 12 of the year. Everything else was new to me. I rewatched From Dusk Till Dawn, and that movie is a blast. I love Robert Rodriguez, George Clooney, Quentin Tarantino, Harvey Keitel, Cheech Marin, Danny Trejo, Salma Hayek. Everybody's in this fucking movie. It is such a good time. Everybody looks like they're having a good time while they do it. Everybody, and I just started watching the TV show like yesterday, and I'm enjoying that thus far. Man, From Dusk Till Dawn just stands above the rest. It is just a good time. I remember the first time I saw From Dusk Till Dawn, and for those of you that haven't seen it, spoilers, because I think personally the best way to see From Dusk Till Dawn is having no fucking idea what you're getting yourself into, because for the first half of that movie, you're along for this ride with these two criminals, these two bank robbers. They've kidnapped a family, and you're along for that, and you're like, yeah, like we're going to Mexico. We're on our way to Mexico. And then the halfway point of the movie arrives when they arrive in Mexico at the Titty Twister, when Cheech Marin gives his great pussy monologue, and all hell breaks loose, quite literally. Total fucking skirt. It's one of those movies that it's one thing and then it's just not. It's just something entirely different. And it goes from being this crime caper to a vampire movie like that. And I remember the shock I felt the first time I watched that movie, where I was like, what the fuck just happened? The title made a lot more sense at that point. It's just a blast, man. It's just so much fun. And I did not feel that much enjoyment watching any other of these 55 movies this month like I did watching From Dusk Till Dawn. So that's it. Those are the 12 movies of 2020. My 12 top picks of 2020, and some of my runners up and, ramblings along the way. But that'll do it for Chase Scene Sunday. Like I said, this is fucking weird doing this by myself. It's just not the same without you, Shep. Thanks for joining me on Chase Scene Sunday, and Johnny and I will see you tomorrow for Mental Health Monday. In addition to being a huge movie geek, I'm a big advocate for mental health, and we're really going to get into that tomorrow. We're going to be going live probably around 7:00. So please join us, join in the conversation, start the dialogue with us. We'll be here
Next week on Chase Scene Sundays. They're groundbreaking. They're cool. They're sexy. They're the films of Robert Rodriguez.